Spanish Empire. In the 1500s, Spain becomes Europe's superpower. Armies in Flanders, fleets on the Atlantic, influence across Italy, and silver pouring in from the Americas. On paper, it looks unstoppable. But Spain's empire runs on a dangerous engine: short-term debt. Wars cost cash every month, and silver arrives late, irregular, and already promised to lenders. So the crown borrows again, against future revenue, until the calendar itself becomes the enemy. Then the breaking point. When payments come due and cash isn't there, Spain doesn't restructure. It suspends payments, a sovereign default, more than once across the 1500s and 1600s. The result is simple. Credit gets more expensive, allies become harder to fund, and every military problem becomes a financial emergency. Spain doesn't lose because it lacks silver. It loses because it can't turn silver into stable trust. Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire sits at the crossroads of trade, ruling from the Balkans to the Middle East. But by the 1800s, the world economy changes faster than the imperial system can adapt. Modern armies, railroads, and administration cost money the old tax base can't reliably produce. So the empire turns outward, borrowing from European markets to cover deficits and modernization. Then interest becomes a trap. By the mid-1870s, debt service overwhelms revenue. In 1875, the Ottoman state defaults. It can't pay what it owes. And the consequence is brutal. Creditors demand control. Soon, parts of key revenues are effectively placed under external supervision to guarantee repayment. That's the real bankruptcy. The Ottoman story shows how debt can quietly turn power into permission. France. By the late 1700s, France is a giant: population, agriculture, culture, and military ambition. It fights major wars, including support for the American Revolution, and it expects glory to pay for itself later. But France's money system has a fatal weakness. The state can borrow, yet it struggles to tax fairly and consistently, especially the wealthy and privileged classes. The government lives on credit, then hits a wall where lenders demand reform. So what causes the bankruptcy? It's not one bill. It's a political inability to raise revenue. By 1788 to 1789, the Treasury is effectively out of options. Borrowing fails, payments stall, and the state calls a National Assembly to fix the problem. That meeting becomes the Estates General, and then history detonates. France's collapse teaches a rule of power. If you can't tax, you can't borrow. If you can't borrow, you can't govern. Fiscal failure becomes legitimacy failure, then regime failure. Austria. Austria, in the Napoleonic era, is a great European power, fighting repeated wars that burn money faster than taxes can replace it. The state chooses the fast solution: print paper notes to fund survival. At first, it works, because people accept the paper. But as notes multiply, value melts. Prices rise, confidence breaks, and eventually the government faces the question every desperate state fears: admit the loss or lose control completely. In 1811, Austria issues what is essentially a state bankruptcy decree. The old notes are pulled in and exchanged at a fraction of their face value, effectively an 80% loss for holders. That's bankruptcy without courts. Savings evaporate, contracts are distorted, and trust is shattered. The consequence lasts longer than the crisis itself. A state can print money once, but after it burns its credibility, future borrowing becomes expensive or impossible, exactly when the next war arrives. Qing China. The Qing Empire rules vast lands and hundreds of millions of people. For much of its history, it relies on agriculture taxes and stable administration. But in the 1800s, it collides with industrial powers, internal rebellions, and modernization costs. The bankruptcy mechanism here is external financial pressure, war indemnities, and forced payments that drain revenue year after year. After major defeats, the Qing is required to pay huge sums, often backed by key revenue sources like tariffs. This creates a chokehold. When large shares of income are pre-committed to repayments, the state loses flexibility. Less money for disaster relief, defense, reform, or stability. To compensate, officials squeeze harder, raising tension in already fragile regions. The Qing doesn't just lose money, it loses time, and time is power. Russia. Imperial Russia enters the 20th century with huge territory, huge population, and huge contradictions. War accelerates the pressure. First costs, then shortages, then political collapse. After the 1917 revolutions, the old state machinery breaks apart. And here comes the purest form of bankruptcy. Not debasement, not delay, repudiation. The new Soviet government rejects the debts of the previous regime. Why does it happen? Because debt is a promise backed by continuity, and continuity is gone. A new government decides it won't carry old obligations, especially to foreign lenders and former elites. The consequence is a financial reset with geopolitical consequences. Creditors lose fortunes, Russia loses access to normal borrowing, and the country's relationship with global capital turns hostile for years. This episode proves a hard rule. When the political order changes, money contracts can become political weapons. In revolutions, bankruptcy can be a strategy, not an accident. Ming China. The Ming dynasty governs China with a powerful bureaucracy and a growing economy. Over time, reforms simplify taxation, often converting complex obligations into payments made in silver. That works until the currency itself becomes unstable. In the early 1600s, silver availability tightens and exchange rates swing. For ordinary people, it becomes a nightmare. You earn in copper, but the state demands silver. When silver grows scarce, the burden rises without any change in the official tax number. So, what causes the bankruptcy? It's a fiscal system tied to a currency the government can't fully control. Monetary stress becomes tax stress. Tax stress becomes unrest. As crises stack, rebellions, military costs, administrative corruption, the state's ability to fund order collapses. The Ming fall shows a subtle truth. A government doesn't need to run out of money to fail. If its tax system becomes unpayable in practice, the state loses compliance, and compliance is the real currency of empire. Roman Empire. Rome builds an empire on conquest, roads, and administration. But maintaining legions across massive borders is expensive, and in crisis periods, revenue can't keep up with military payroll. The empire reaches for the quiet tool: debase the coinage. Over time, coins contain less precious metal. Officially, it's the same money. In reality, it's a hidden tax on everyone holding it. During the 3rd century crisis, political instability and constant warfare accelerate the problem. As the currency weakens, prices jump and trust erodes. People demand more coins for the same goods, soldiers demand more pay, and the state prints and mints even more, feeding the spiral. That's Rome's bankruptcy. Not one default, but a collapse of monetary credibility. The consequence is fragmentation. When money loses reliability, trade shrinks, taxation becomes harder, and regions become more self-contained. Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire becomes one of history's richest states, supported by a massive agricultural base and a sophisticated revenue administration. For a long time, its wealth funds courts, armies, and expansion. But in the late period, the system begins to strain. Long, expensive wars, especially in the Deccan, raise costs, while political competition weakens the state's ability to collect and redistribute revenue smoothly. Local power holders keep more for themselves, and the center struggles to enforce the old fiscal order. So, what causes the bankruptcy? It's a collapse of revenue control. The empire still has wealth on its land, but the central government can't reliably extract it. And without reliable extraction, it can't reliably pay the machine that keeps the empire together. East India Company. This isn't a crowned empire, it's a company that behaves like one. The East India Company controls territory, collects revenue, and commands armed force. It's a private institution with public power. In the early 1770s, financial stress hits hard. Costs rise, revenue expectations fall, and broader credit conditions tighten. The company carries huge obligations and struggles to turn its empire into predictable cash flow. The bankruptcy moment is political. The company becomes too big to fail, and Parliament steps in with major intervention. Acts like the Regulating Act signal a shift. Government oversight increases because the company's finances threaten national stability. The result is a power transfer disguised as a rescue. The company survives, but autonomy shrinks. This is the modern template. When an entity controls critical revenue and trade, its collapse becomes a national crisis. And once the state rescues you, the state starts to own you, in rules, oversight, and control.